They pitied me for staying silent, until my words cost them everything. I'll never forget the look in my father's eyes that day. It wasn't anger. It wasn't disappointment. It was empty, like he'd never expected anything from me in the first place. At home, they called me Emily, but sometimes I thought that name existed just to fill out forms. In the Carter family of Millbrook, Ohio, I was the lazy daughter. Mom's words, not the pride of the family. That title belonged to my brother, Ryan, tall, charming, and running Carter and Son Construction like he'd been born with a hard hat on. Yeah, Carter and Son. There was never room for and daughter. For the longest time, I thought if I worked hard, graduated with a civil engineering degree from the University of Cincinnati, and even earned my project management certification, things would change. But when I came back home after graduation, Dad just said, "We could use someone to handle paperwork in the office. You can sit there and help." I swallowed the words "I want to be out in the field," smiled, and nodded. From the outside, I probably looked lucky. Steady job, respected family, successful brother. But I knew the truth. Every day began and ended in 4 cramped walls, surrounded by the smell of toner and stacks of contracts I would never sign as the one in charge. Ryan never missed a chance to remind me where I belonged. At family dinners, in between the clink of silverware, he'd grin and tell guests about his little sister who's allergic to dust, while I was the one staying late in the office to fix his crew's botched blueprints. Dad would nod along, and Mom would change the subject to dessert. Same routine, over and over. I'd gotten used to being underestimated. But getting used to something doesn't mean it stops hurting. The cruel joke? I love construction. The smell of fresh lumber. The sound of a drill biting into wood. The moment a design on paper takes shape under the open sky. But in my family's eyes, that wasn't my role. They wanted a neat little receptionist, smiling at visitors, transferring calls to Ryan's office. Every time I mentioned working in the field, Dad would sigh, "Emily, that's not the kind of work for you." Sound familiar? Women in construction across America still hear that exact line. I thought I could live with it. Keep just enough distance to avoid a fight, but not drift so far that I disappeared. Then came my mom's phone call last week. "Sunday's the ribbon cutting for Ryan's new complex. You'll be there, right?" Her tone wasn't a question. It was an order. I started to come up with an excuse, but she cut me off. "The press will be there. The city council, even some of your old friends. Don't embarrass us." That was that. In our family, Mom's invites weren't optional. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at my framed engineering degree, wondering what it meant if even my own family didn't believe in me. I remembered the one time Ryan and I worked on a project together. In high school, for a model bridge competition. I'd stayed late in the library, researching and designing the whole thing. Ryan showed up only for the final presentation. We won first place, and he soaked up every bit of the praise. When the teacher asked about the concept, he smirked. Sometimes inspiration strikes at the last minute. I stayed silent then, just like I'd stayed silent for years. But this time, I felt something different. I don't know why, but a small part of me wanted to go. Wanted to see that world they kept telling me I didn't belong in. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe I just needed to prove to myself that I could walk into it without bowing my head. I didn't expect Ryan to greet me warmly. In fact, I was bracing myself for his smug smile and the usual jabs. But deep down, I also knew there were things they didn't know. Secrets I wasn't sure I'd keep forever. Sunday came faster than I expected. The morning sky was heavy and gray, with a light drizzle. The kind of weather I'd normally use as the perfect excuse to stay in, wrapped in a blanket, binging Netflix. But not this time. This time, there was no hiding. I slipped into dark jeans, a simple navy blouse, and an old blazer. Polished enough that Mom wouldn't complain, comfortable enough that I still felt like myself. Staring into the mirror, I told my reflection, just a few hours, then you can leave. But in my gut, the weight felt like a stone. I drove back into Millbrook along the same familiar stretch of road that cut past mom and pop shops. The old gas station with its faded "We Fix Anything" sign. The one Ryan and I used to stop at for sodas when we were kids. Back then, we were just two scrappy little siblings, still oblivious to the distance our family would wedge between us. Now, every time I pass it, it feels like I'm moving through an old movie reel. No sound, just washed-out images flickering by. When I reached the new development, I could see the flags, the balloons, the big white event tents from half a mile away. It looked more like a fair than a ribbon cutting. People milled around in suits and cocktail dresses, Starbucks cups or craft beers in hand, laughter spilling into the damp air. I had just parked when my phone buzzed. "Mom, you're here, right? Don't let your seat be the only empty one." I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. Mom was waiting near the entrance, wearing the kind of measured smile that exists purely for an audience. "Emily, good. You made it." Her eyes swept over me from head to toe, followed by a small approving nod, like I'd passed some silent dress code inspection. Then, leaning in, "Ryan's talking to the mayor. Don't interrupt. Just blend in and keep the conversation light." I swallowed the words. I'm not here to start a scene, and just smiled, because I knew exactly what kind of look I'd get if I said it out loud. Inside the tent, the air was thick with the smell of coffee, fresh pastries, and laughter. Snippets of conversation drifted from nearby contractors, deals, bids, and timelines, while the faint clang of metal from the job site echoed in the background. Everything looked perfect, at least on the surface. Ryan stood in the center of a circle of men in tailored suits, towering over most of them, looking every inch the star of the show. When our eyes met, his mouth curled into that half-smile I knew too well. He walked over, clapped me on the shoulder, hard enough to push me back a step, and announced, "Here she is, my sister, Emily. The one who keeps the office running like clockwork and keeps herself far, far away from all that dust on the job site." The group laughed. I laughed, too. But in my head, I was counting 1, 2, 3, anything to keep from firing back. I'd learned that silence doesn't always mean weakness. Sometimes it means you know the battle isn't worth starting. Not yet. What I didn't expect was the man standing in that group. Maybe early 40s, plain white shirt, no tie. Who didn't laugh? When I glanced his way, he gave a small nod, the kind that said, "I get it." Just a nod. But in this carefully staged atmosphere, it felt almost like an act of solidarity. I drifted through the crowd, chatting with a few old acquaintances from town. Some asked what I was doing these days, and when I said, "Still working at the family company," they'd nod in that must be nice and easy way. No one asked if I liked it. In Millbrook, conversations stayed on the surface. Nobody poked at the darker corners, but each polite congratulations felt like a knock on a locked door inside me. That was why I'd come. Not just to make an appearance, but to see for myself what they'd built without ever letting me lay a single brick. The ceremony hadn't even started when Ryan stepped up to the temporary stage to test the mic. His voice boomed across the tent. "Today, we're not just opening a building. We're unveiling a new symbol for Millbrook." Applause erupted. I stayed in the back corner, watching every move he made, and thinking about all the times I'd done exactly that from the sidelines, wondering if he'd ever see me as an equal Then Mom appeared at my side, took my hand, and said, "Stay for the whole event. There'll be plenty of people who want to meet you." And that's when it hit me. I hadn't just walked into this event. I'd walked into my own lion's den, not to hide, but to witness, and maybe to wait for the right moment. Ryan led the crowd toward the new balcony overlooking the red brick plaza. I hung back at the edge, ready to fade into the background, until I heard his voice over the mic. "My sister's here. Emily, why don't you come up here and tell me if this passes inspection? You studied this stuff, didn't you?" Laughter rippled through the crowd, tinged with that mean-spirited amusement that comes when the joke isn't really a joke. I knew Ryan well enough to recognize it for what it was, a staged invitation, a safe joke for him, a little test for me. And the way he put extra weight on "studied this stuff" made it clear. This wasn't about involving me, it was about seeing what I'd do when the spotlight hit. I stepped forward, trying to keep my voice steady. The new railing gleamed, still reeking of fresh paint. But the second my hand touched the weld where two steel bars met, I knew something was off. Rough and thin, not the seamless joint it should have been. I'd done my senior thesis on weld inspections. This feeling? No mistaking it. "There's an issue here," I said quietly. But the mic nearby carried my voice, and the crowd went still for half a beat. Ryan raised his eyebrows, pretending to be surprised. "An issue? You sure about that? This crew's the best I've ever hired. They wrapped it up just yesterday." A low ripple of whispers moved through the crowd. I could have smiled, let it go, and walked away. But if someone stepped up here for photos and this thing gave out, that wasn't something I was willing to ignore. "The weld isn't reinforced enough," I said, a little louder. "Too much weight and it could snap." A mocking chuckle came from somewhere behind me. "Sounds like one of those home DIY shows on YouTube," a man called out. Ryan laughed with them and tossed in, "My sister's always been paranoid. When we were kids, she'd see a wobbly chair and swear it was about to collapse." The laughter swelled, my face burned. Not from embarrassment, but from anger. He was downplaying an actual safety risk just to protect his image. Then I spotted him. The man in the white shirt I'd noticed earlier. He wasn't laughing. Instead, he stared straight at the spot I was pointing to and slowly started walking toward us. I didn't know who he was, but his eyes said, "I believe you." And in this sea of condescending stares, that felt like someone had just handed me a ticket to stay standing. I started to step back, to fade from the spotlight. But just then, a cluster of guests climbed onto the balcony to take selfies with Ryan. Instinct kicked in. "I don't think it's safe for that many people to be up here at once," I said, loud enough for it to carry. A few heads turned. Ryan kept smiling, but I caught the tiny twitch at the corner of his mouth. The only tell that he didn't like me cutting into his show. I knew I'd just crossed into dangerous territory. But in my head, one thought rang clear. If I stay quiet now, I'm complicit. And maybe this was the first step in never letting them decide my worth again. It happened fast. Too fast for me to piece my thoughts together. Seconds after my warning, 4 or 5 people were packed onto the balcony, laughing, holding up their phones for photos with Ryan. I saw the steel bar tremble, and then snap. A sharp crack like a pen breaking in two. Before I could yell, part of the railing dipped. The group staggered. A woman slipped, grabbing my arm to steady herself, and the force yanked me backward. My back slammed against the crossbar before I hit the concrete floor hard. Everything went quiet. The kind of silence that swallows sound whole. I stared up at the gray sky, the breath knocked clean out of me. Pain. Sharp, electric. Tore through my back, down my legs. I tried to move, but my legs wouldn't respond. Panic, cold and crushing, surged through me. Ryan? My voice was barely above a whisper. I can't feel my legs. And then I heard him. Not panicked, not rushing to my side, but irritated. Get up, Emily. Don't make a scene. A small laugh came from somewhere in the crowd. Probably just a little tumble, someone said. I wanted to scream at them. Tell them this wasn't a joke, that something was very, very wrong. But Ryan didn't kneel down, didn't help me. Instead, he turned to the guests, smiling as if nothing had happened. Sorry, folks. Just a minor hiccup. The party goes on. The chill from the concrete seeped into my spine, cold sweat breaking out along my hairline. I scanned the crowd. A few people looked uneasy, but they quickly averted their eyes. In Millbrook, keeping up appearances mattered more than anything, even if it meant ignoring someone sprawled on the ground. And then I remembered, years ago, when I'd crashed my bike and skinned my knees, Ryan had laughed and called me a drama queen in front of his friends. That same humiliation settled over me now, except this time, I couldn't just stand up, brush off the dirt, and walk away. Out of nowhere, the man in the white shirt stepped out from the crowd. The same one who'd nodded at me earlier. He knelt beside me, voice firm. Don't move. Somebody call 911. Now. Then he looked straight at Ryan. If anyone else steps on that section, it's going to give way completely. His voice carried far enough for everyone around to hear. No one was laughing now. Ryan frowned. And you are? This is my event? I don't think. The man cut him off. I'm a structural safety inspector. And I think if you keep stalling, we're going to have more people headed to the hospital. The words landed like a brick in the middle of the silence. Lying there, I was in pain, on the verge of tears. Not just from the injury, but from the sheer shamelessness of my own brother. But beneath the cold and humiliation, there was a small spark of warmth. The feeling of someone, even a stranger, believing you instantly. I didn't know it yet, but this moment was the start of something my family would never be able to control again. The man kept his hand on my shoulder, holding me steady, his tone calm but unshakable. My name's Mark Evans. I've been inspecting construction safety for over 15 years. She can't move her legs, and I suspect a spinal injury. No one touches her except trained medics. Ryan stood a few feet away, his face tightening like someone had just thrown ice water at him. You don't know her. Emily overreacts to everything. This is a big event. I don't want. Mark cut in again, sharper this time. You don't want what? To save your sister in front of all these people? The question hit the crowd like a nail driven into wood. A few guests lifted their phones, recording. I saw Ryan glance at them, a flash of worry crossing his face before he forced it down and offered a stiff smile to a few acquaintances. Mom appeared at my side, leaned down, and whispered the same old line I'd heard all my life. Get up, Emily, everyone's watching. I bit my lip, my throat tight. Mom, I can't move my legs. Her eyes blinked fast, but instead of fear, she turned to Mark with a look that was almost scolding. You're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. Mark ignored her completely. He pulled out his phone, called 911, and gave a precise account of my condition and our location. When he hung up, he shrugged off his light jacket and laid it on the concrete beside me. You're going to feel cold. Breathe slowly. The ambulance is on its way. His voice was warm and steady. So different from the fake, image-conscious reassurances I'd been fed my whole life. Nearby, a couple started whispering. They admitted they'd noticed something wrong with that railing earlier in the day. The wife even said she'd thought about mentioning it, but Ryan had told them it had already been inspected, so she'd dropped it. Mark caught that and nodded. If anyone has photos or videos, keep them. They're important evidence. Every word he spoke didn't just protect me. It boxed Ryan into a corner he couldn't charm his way out of. I stayed still, aching and exhausted, but something inside me felt strange. A mix of relief and unease. For years, whenever I spoke up, people would glance at Ryan to confirm if I was worth believing. But today, for the first time, someone didn't need his approval. And he did it in front of the whole town. The faint wail of sirens grew louder, closer. Ryan turned away, phone pressed to his ear. "Keep your mouth shut. No, don't let anyone talk to the press," I heard him mutter, and in that moment, I knew exactly what he was afraid of losing. And it wasn't me. Mark stayed beside me, his eyes locked on mine. "Emily, I've seen too many accidents swept under the rug to protect someone's reputation. Don't let them bury this. You have the right to let people know the truth." I didn't answer. Not yet. But his words began to take root. When the ambulance pulled up, 2 female paramedics rushed in with a stretcher and gear. Mark spoke to them directly, detailing the fall and my symptoms like they'd worked together before. One of them turned to me with a reassuring smile. "We're going to do everything we can to keep you safe." As they prepped to move me, I looked around. At the same faces that had laughed at me minutes ago, now staring at the ground to avoid my eyes, and I realized that no matter what happened next, everyone here had just seen the truth. Inside the ambulance, the siren wailed and red lights flashed across the windows in quick, relentless bursts, but my mind felt like it was drifting somewhere far away. The numbness from my waist down wasn't fading. Tss, if anything. The sharp jolts in my back spiked every time the rig hit a bump. One of the EMTs kept asking me about the pain, about whether I could feel my toes, but my answer stayed the same. No, I can't feel anything. I tried not to cry, but the tears came anyway. Not from the pain in my body, but from how my family had reacted. Or more accurately, how they hadn't. At the hospital, they wheeled me straight into the ER, harsh white lights, the squeak of rubber soles on tile, the steady beep-beep of a monitor. A young doctor leaned over me. "Emily Carter? We're taking you for an MRI right away to check your spine. You can't move, understood?" His voice was professional, but warm. The exact opposite of the cold detachment I'd just endured. About an hour later, lying in recovery, a nurse came in to tell me someone outside wanted to speak to me. A local reporter. I didn't even have time to answer before I heard Mark's voice from the hallway. "If she doesn't want to talk, I'll handle it." His tone was solid steel. A moment later, he stepped in, carrying a folder. "Emily, this thing's already out there." Several guests filmed the railing collapse. "And your brother telling you to get up. And it's all over Facebook. It's spreading fast." I froze. In a small town like Millbrook, news traveled fast, but I hadn't expected it to explode publicly. Mark set his phone on the side table and played one of the clips, on screen. I was lying motionless while Ryan stood a few feet away, forcing a tight smile before saying, "Get up, Emily." "Don't make a big deal out of this," you could hear the crowd murmuring. And then Mark's voice, cutting through. "You don't want to save your sister?" The comments beneath the video were brutal. How could a brother act like that? She warned them about the railing. They ignored her. I felt shock, yes, but also a strange lightness. My whole life, my side of the story had been filtered or buried before it ever left the family's front door. This time, the truth had slipped out, untouched, and everyone could see it. 3 hours later, a police officer knocked on my door. "Ms. Carter, we're investigating the incident. There's evidence the railing didn't meet safety standards, and that the site supervisor may have known about it beforehand." I didn't need to ask who they meant. After they left, I overheard two nurses at the desk. They're saying her brother knew, but still let people up there. Word is, there were even emails warning him, but he ignored them to keep the event on schedule. My stomach nodded. I remembered sitting in the office once when Ryan tossed aside a report on a structural flaw and laughed. Just paperwork, Emily. Out on the site is what really matters. So this was his reality. The next morning, the local paper ran a photo of me on a stretcher with the headline, "Railing collapses at grand opening. Victim had warned ahead of time." The article quoted witnesses, described how my warning was brushed off, and named Carter and Sons as the responsible contractor. My family, people who lived and breathed their reputation, had to be spiraling. I didn't feel giddy with revenge, but I won't pretend there wasn't a quiet satisfaction in knowing that this time, every word I'd said had been proven right. Not behind closed doors, not at a family dinner, but in front of the whole town. That afternoon, Mark stopped by with black coffee and a muffin. He sat down, letting out a slow sigh. "Emily, I get that you've got plenty of reasons to keep quiet. But trust me, if you don't tell the whole truth, they'll find a way to rewrite it." I looked at him and thought about all the years I'd kept my mouth shut. For the first time, I realized I didn't want to do that anymore. The news turned faster than I ever expected. Just 2 days after the first article ran, the State Department of Occupational Safety put out a statement. They were launching a full investigation into the railing collapse. I wasn't the only one reading that with a strange mix of nerves and relief. In a town like Millbrook, the powers that be usually preferred to handle things quietly, especially when the Carter family was involved. But this time, there were too many eyes watching from the outside. They couldn't sweep it under the rug. That afternoon, I was lying in bed flipping through an old magazine when the door swung open. A man in a gray suit stepped in, introducing himself as a federal OSHA investigator, flanked by a county sheriff's deputy. His voice was calm, but clear. "Ms. Carter, we need your statement about what happened, and about any prior safety warnings you may have made." I caught a flash of irritation in Ryan's eyes from the corner of the room. My brother jumped in. "She's still recovering. Is this really—" The investigator cut him off, voice going ice cold. "Mr. Carter, this is a formal investigation. You might want to listen." I told them everything. About the warning email I'd sent 2 weeks earlier. About the morning of meeting where I brought it up again and Ryan laughed it off. No softening the details this time. I watched the deputy's expression shift when I explained how the job had been rushed to finish before the VIP guests left town. The next day, part of Carter and Sons headquarters was sealed off. They hauled out files, computers, even the original blueprints. Rumors started swirling. It wasn't just the railing. Other parts of the project had major safety issues. I overheard nurses whispering that Ryan might lose his contractor's license altogether. The most unexpected thing came from the owner of the little grocery store down the street from the hospital. One morning, she walked in with a bag of waffles and a hot coffee, setting them on my tray. "Emily," she said, "we all know you've been treated badly for years. Don't let them bury this one." Her words hit me with equal parts warmth and bitterness. People had seen all along. They'd just stayed quiet. Maybe they were afraid to cross my family. But now, with the story out in the open, voices were starting to come forward, and it gave me strength. That night, my lawyer called. His voice was low, steady. "Emily, if the investigation confirms they ignored your warnings, this won't just be an OSHA violation. It could go criminal." I stayed silent for a moment, not because I feared Ryan facing consequences, but because I knew. This time, nothing would go back to how it was. And truthfully, I didn't want it to. Overnight, The story jumped from small-town construction mishap to statewide headlines. News broadcasts showed the broken railing, close-ups of rust stains along the welds, then cut to Ryan in a crisp suit at the ribbon cutting. The local station interviewed residents. And one man flat out said, "Everyone knows the Carters cut corners. This time, we're just lucky no one died." The comment made me shiver, and, strangely, eased something in me. At least the truth was starting to surface. But my family didn't stay quiet. They hired a PR firm, and the very next day an article popped up. Emily Carter. The story twisted? It was loaded with insinuations that I was exaggerating to settle personal scores. They brought up the fact that I'd left the company months earlier for cultural fit reasons, framing it as proof I was bitter. A relative I'd once trusted even went on record saying I always dramatized everything. Hearing it made me want to hurl the TV remote across the room. What shook me more were the calls from old acquaintances, the ones I'd chatted with over coffee at the corner cafe. "Emily, be careful. They're digging through your personal life," they warned. That personal life included the year I dropped out of school to care for my mom, and the endless hours I'd worked in the family business without a single ounce of recognition. Now those private wounds were being dug up like weapons. I remember one night, staring at the hospital ceiling, when I got a text from Mark, a freelance journalist I'd once helped when he was just starting out. It was short. "Emily, if you want, I'll tell your story the way it needs to be told. No edits, no sugarcoating, no gag orders." I didn't reply right away. My mind went back to the time Mark's piece had been killed by a major outlet for daring to criticize a powerful construction firm. He'd told me then, sometimes a true story needs someone willing to burn with it. That night, I realized I needed to start burning. I called him back. I told him everything. The things I'd never said out loud. How Ryan once signed off on cheap, substandard materials just to save enough for the company's holiday party. How they'd pushed crews to work 14-hour days without insurance. Mark's voice dropped. "Emily, they're going to hate you for this. But there are people who'll thank you for the rest of their lives." And I knew, right then, this wasn't just about a broken railing anymore. This was going to be a public fight between truth and power. Mark's article dropped on Monday morning, and I can still remember the bitter smell of cheap coffee in my paper cup as I watched it spread across social media. This wasn't some buried headline tucked in the corner of a local page. It was splashed across the front of major outlets with a headline that hit like a hammer. "Broken railing, broken system. The truth, buried in Millbrook." Mark wrote it all. From the bargain bin materials to the unpaid overtime. Shifts without insurance. He wove my story through it like a thread, not dressing it up, not dramatizing it. Just letting the truth punch through on its own. The reaction came faster than I'd expected. And my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Emails from strangers, messages from former workers, even people who'd stayed silent for years now speaking up. A single mom who worked as a welder wrote, "They made me work past midnight while my son had a fever. Thank you for saying something." An old carpenter. The same one who used to drink beer with Ryan every Friday night. Sent me a photo of broken railings from another project and said, "They've been working like this for years. Took someone this long to pull the rug back. But the threats came too." An anonymous text warning me to be careful driving home. An email referencing something so personal only my family could have known it. I won't lie. There were moments my heart raced so fast I had to stop and catch my breath. But the anger burned hotter than the fear. And I realized, more than anything, they just wanted me silent. What I didn't expect was the state government stepping in. Not because they wanted to be heroes, but because public pressure was too loud to ignore. A surprise press conference was held, and I sat on my couch, TV volume nearly maxed, as the spokesperson announced. We will conduct a full investigation into all Carter construction projects over the past 10 years. That one sentence made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because for the first time in years, I watched their power take a direct hit. Ryan reacted exactly how I thought he would, smirking on live TV, claiming this was a smear campaign from bitter people. But this time, his eyes didn't hold steady. There was a flicker, like he'd just realized the game had changed, and the field wasn't tilted in his favor anymore. I knew this wasn't the end. But sitting there in my tiny kitchen, sipping coffee, scrolling through Mark's article and hundreds of supportive comments, it felt like, for the first time in years, I had my voice back. And the best part? I knew that voice was keeping them up at night. If there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's this. Silence can be a weapon for the oppressor, but it can also become the cage we build for ourselves when we speak up. Not just for ourselves, but for the people who don't have the strength to yet. We crack the door open for real change. The truth will make people uncomfortable, but as we say in America, sunlight is the best disinfectant. We can't wait for someone else to shine that light, and we can't let toxic relationships or warped traditions choke out our worth. Justice isn't always handed to you. Sometimes you have to stand up and take it. Even if your knees are shaking, this story isn't just about one personal fight. It's a reminder that every one of us has the power to hit the nail on the head, to call out the real problem, and make an impact that matters. When you find your voice and dare to use it, you don't just change your own story. You give others permission to find theirs. If this story hit something in you, I want to hear from you. Share your thoughts or your own experience in the comments below. Hit that like button if you believe in speaking up, and subscribe so you don't miss more raw, dramatic stories with something real to say. And wherever you are today, I hope it's a day filled with peace and a little bit of hope, because no matter how loud the chaos gets out there, you can always find your own light.